The biggest news of the week, and this is where we got to start. Zane Robertson of New Zealand, one of the identical twins who moved to Kenya at the age of 17 to train, tested positive for EPO. Initially, he said he didn't take EPO. He was actually went in for a COVID shot and they accidentally gave him EPO. And he's been banned for the sport for 8 years because he came up with such a BS excuse. But this is huge because I think it's the intersection of so many things in our sport. Doping, Kenya, Western athletes, biases, how pervasive is doping throughout the world. And I think there's connections to all of this with this case.
Yeah, the Robertson twins, they moved to Kenya back in 2006 or 2007, like you said, when they were 17, to try to become the best they could be. And they both ended up being very good runners. Zane was 12th in the 2016 Olympic final in the 10,000. He ran 27:33. That was a New Zealand record at the time, which has since been broken by Jake. He's the New Zealand record holder in the half marathon, 59:47, and the full marathon, 2:08:19. Now, he wasn't in Kenya for that whole time. He did move to Ethiopia after a few years in Kenya. But their whole gamble, moving out there, they barely knew anyone. They just bet on themselves. It looked like it was paying off because of these results. They became world class distance runners, which is what they were trying to do. And that was one of the big reasons it was such a compelling story, right? Is who does this? What Americans would ever move out to Kenya at 17 and just try to become professional runners? Doesn't happen. So to see Western runners do it was very interesting. But then, of course, now it's like, do we question everything this guy's done? He's 33 years old. His results, he technically he said he retired earlier this year, and now it comes out, well, actually, he knew he was facing down basically a career-ending suspension anyway, which he neglected to mention when he announced his retirement. But now we have to ask, was it a case of he was getting older, he saw doping around him, he got disillusioned and just decided he would try it and hope he didn't get caught? Or has he been doping the entire time and he got careless and it finally came back to bite him? I would really like to hear what he has to say on this subject. He hasn't said anything publicly to this point, but you have to question everything this guy's accomplished. When you busted for EPO, you don't get a lot of credit among running fans.
Personally, I've been of the belief if you get popped for something that could not accidentally get in your system, all of your records should be invalidated. But do I think he was doping the whole time? To be honest, I probably don't. I mean, what's interesting to me also is in 2016, this is a guy that was extremely outspoken about doping. Before the Olympics, he admitted, quote, told News Talk News he told News Talk in New Zealand, I have been close to doping. I can't name people or countries because I had some death threats a few months ago just for even mentioning the topic around the area. I don't want to get killed for doing what is right or speaking up, but I feel Twitter and social media are a place I can do that. I was approached once in 2007 by someone in Kenya. But as you can see in my results over the years, I was nowhere. As a youth growing up in New Zealand, sportsmanship and general morals, you can't consider that. It's not something normal for us. The approach happened really early on. It was kind of weird. I'd never experienced anything like that before. He just came to us and gave us his card and said he was a doctor who specialized in sports performance. We said, what type of performance? And he said, everything that will make you run faster. He gave us his card and left quickly. So, I mean, who knows? Like, was this a front? Was this a cover? This ties in so many things, as Weldon said. I mean, I can tie this to Jama Aden, Mo Farah. I have questions. Hell, even Paula Radcliffe. I know a lot of people think she was on drugs. I always said, well, if she was, I don't think she was at the beginning when she was carrying signs to the world saying EPO cheats out. But sometimes you just get fed up, see everybody else doing it and join the dark side. I don't know. It's a disturbing story to me. I think that, like, I've been saying this, every so often on the show, I think. But one of my biggest disappointments as an adult is learning that the world is corrupt, or there's a lot of corrupt people, a lot of cheating, stealing going on. And I think that when he and his brother moved there at 17, they wanted to be the best in the world, learn from the best in the world. They didn't dream of like, oh, let's be cheats and cheat our way to the top. And here they are, or at least here he is, 16 years later, doing it and then coming up with a whopper of an excuse. And forging documents to try to do it, but apparently was caught on that.
Yeah, that was interesting. I mean, I guess if you're getting he's 33, and if he accepted the suspension, just admitted that I did it, could get a 1 year reduction. It would be 3 years, but that's still taking him until he's 36. He essentially gambled that he would get no time off because he was probably thinking, well, 3 years, 8 years doesn't really matter. I'm going to shoot for zero, and if I don't get zero, I'll just retire. But we've seen a lot of these excuses. The AIU, certainly in the last few years, I'll give them credit. They've dug into some of these explanations and found they're not credible. These medical records that you're providing, they don't line up with the hospital's actual record. Sometimes the hospitals don't even exist. So from that angle, I commend the AIU, and they said that there's cooperation here between the AIU, between the Anti-Doping Agency of Kenya, and from Drug Free Sport New Zealand. All of them worked on this case, so that's also commendations there. But Robert, you mentioned, was this something he was doing his whole career, or did he just turn to the dark side later? If I had to guess, not really knowing Zane personally, my guess would be this is something he just started doing later in his career after perhaps getting disillusioned, going off the quotes he said. But do I know that 100%? No, that's just my instinct of the most likely scenario.
Yeah, but there's a message board poster, and I looked up his IP address. He's coming from New Zealand. He said, "Oh, it's an open secret here. Everybody here knew that they were dirty in New Zealand." So I asked him to explain why they thought that. Um, and I've been reading on the message board. I'll probably get sued if I was in Europe. People are like, "Oh, Julian Wanders, another Western guy from Europe living in New Zealand. I mean, living in Kenya. Is he doping?" You know, but I mean, there's no evidence they are. But I do think this, like, when you're living in the when you're from a Western country, this is just my personal opinion, and you go to Africa to train, it makes me more suspicious. Like, although Kenya's doing a great job of catching people nowadays. But by the way, he was not caught for a test in Kenya. He was caught taking a test at, I think, the Great North Run, right?
Green Manchester Run in England in May of 2022.
But I know Supporters Club member Des Linden went to Kenya. Maybe you want to get rid of the distractions. But I talked about the ties to. I would hope that if this guy knows it, people are like, oh, hopefully he comes clean. But we say that about everybody. Why do we think he's more likely to come clean than everybody else? And he's got to live in Kenya the rest of his life. You think he's just? I mean, in Baltimore where I live, you come clean, you get shot and killed. He'd already said that in 2016. You get shot and killed. So I'm
Oh,
not optimistic that he's gonna come clean on everybody. But you know, the ties here are fascinating because we've heard a lot about doping in Kenya, and it's always struck me as weird. I know that Kenya and Ethiopia aren't the same. Sounds like there's just more free form of medical care in Kenya, but I'm like, there's got to be doping in Ethiopia. How can we never hear about it? Well, this guy spent a decent amount of time in Ethiopia. He's married to an Ethiopian, so he was going back and forth between the countries. His ex girlfriend was part of Jama Aden's group. She was popped for the biological passport. So that was in 2017. And when that happened, I think I put something on a thread. I said, now this gets interesting. And I'd forgotten I did that. I looked at the post, someone else started it, but I'm pretty sure I changed the title to that because I was like, whoa, here. You know, it, you know, just because your ex-girlfriend did something doesn't, or ex-fiance did something doesn't mean you did it, but just makes it much more likely now that he's actually positive for EPO. You know,
and the
wow.
ABP violations, that were her results were stripped from 2014 to 2016. Now I don't know exactly when they were together and when they broke up, but it seems like she was doping quite some time ago. So that's another sort of reason you might think, oh, this actually isn't something he just started doing when he got older.
So, and he moved to Kenya when 2007, John, is that right? Is he?
2006 or 2007, yeah,
And he,
around
and he
then.
got approached right away. The other thing that's crazy here is who took him in Kenya.
Patrick Sang was one of the first people he worked with there.
Oh, I didn't know that. I wasn't trying to go there and apply anything about Patrick Shane, but I know that Shaheen, the world record holder in the steeplechase, was very gracious to him. And these kids had no money, and he let him live there. So I don't know. He gets there right away, and apparently he says, at least in 2016. Now, who knows if we should believe anything he says? But you know, his backstory was we were bullied a lot as kids in New Zealand. We decided we got into running. They take you down if you try to excel in New Zealand, did anything except for rugby. We just went to Kenya, didn't know what we were going to do. Shaheen was nice to us. We kept training. But there's another post on the message board from a Let's Run visitor who ran with him, Zane, in New York, I think in 2016. And he said that Zane told him Asbel Kiprop was on drugs at the time. Now, Kiprop didn't get popped, I don't think, until 2019. So I asked
2018.
the message board poster. He's like, oh, yeah. He told me, he said everybody, based on the way he worked on the workouts, he knew that, which is interesting because I had heard from another person before Kiprop, and this person probably has connections to Zane. The same thing. That Kiprop was dirty before he popped. And I loved Kiprop. I'm like, oh, I really hope that's not true. And, well, he was popped. So just a lot to unpack here. And in terms of this part of the message board thread, I mean, it's probably 20 pages long now, was kind of driving me nuts. Some people were saying, I don't know, they were trying to like blame it on certain countries. Is this a New Zealand positive? Is this a Kenyan positive? And Kenyans were saying it's a Westerner doping, and Westerners were saying it's Kenyan doping. It's, to me, it's just, you can lie, cheat, and steal whether you're from Kenya, New Zealand, America, whatever. Like, why are we trying to blame it on the country? Ultimately, he's responsible for his decisions, but it's just, I don't know. Some people thought I was condoning it. I think you might get worn down if you see everybody else doing it and decide to join the dark side, like the cyclists.
Yeah, you say, Robert, not to condemn a country, but you just went through and essentially cast some shade on everyone who was associated with in Kenya. And that's kind of how this game works, right? But is it fair?
It's a little unfair that in Kenya, there are really two main training hubs. There's Eldoret and Iten. And a lot of times, there aren't a lot of barriers to entry to run or work out with those groups. Like when I say they were connected with Patrick Sang, well, they just started showing up to run at practices where Patrick Sang was. That sort of thing. You can't just show up and start running with the Bowerman Track Club or the On Athletics Club in the USA. But if you're in E10 or Eldoret, they'll just go on these long runs. And yes, there will be a coach of a pro group nominally in charge of some of them. But you can, the barrier to access, if you're a pretty decent, like semi elite runner, you can just show up and start training with some of these guys in a way that you cannot in Western running environments.
To some extent, yes, John, but there's a shitload of people training in Flagstaff. You could easily go on a run with the Bowerman and Flagstaff, see people there. But I would say the difference is, and this is where a guy like El Keniano's going to get upset, there's not a history of EPO bust in Flagstaff. Very few people, a couple people have been popped. So I think doping has been more, or at least recently, and there's more runners in Kenya, but a lot more people have been getting caught there. So how systematic is this? How much exposure is there? And can he start naming names? But on the other side of this coin, like this message board poster, El Keniano, who's in Kenya, why are you going to believe anything this guy says? You just try to lie to the anti-doping authorities and get off with it.
That's a fair question to ask, Weldon. You have to scrutinize it because, again, yes, he got caught. He tried to lie about it, and then his lie was found out. We still don't know what. We haven't seen a second explanation of, oh, this is actually what happened. But yes, you would have to question that, given that he does have a history of already trying and failing to cover his tracks.
But this does sort of bring out like the tribal allegiances of people, the nationalism. It just there's so many intersections of this. El Keniano, when he got busted last night, probably woke up and posted last night, 11:47 East Coast time. Pardon my language, mods. Feel free to move my post, but karma is an effing biatch. Good riddance to bad rubbish. Now get the bloody cheat out of my country. That's it. I needed to vent. Emoji, emoji. And you're like, whoa, what's that about? And Keniano in another post, like an hour and a half later, said he's the one who moved to Ethiopia back in 2016 and claimed, quote, death threats in Kenya, that we couldn't prove it. Zane ended up staying in Ethiopia longer and developed deeper ties there, while Jake returned to Kenya almost immediately. And then he goes into the other red flag about, Zane's Ethiopian girlfriend getting busted. But El Kenyano didn't like it because he's like, oh, this guy's saying everyone in Kenya is doping. Then goes to Ethiopia, says people trying to kill him, comes back, and now turns out to be a doper himself. He's, like, take some personal responsibility, right?
That's true, but then some have come back to El Keniano and said, hey, it sounds like he was doping in Kenya. So everybody is doping in Kenya, whether they're white, black, Western, or East, or, from Africa, whatever. It's really fascinating. And one thing that's unfortunate to me is, like everything in modern world, people are trying to make this a racial argument, saying, oh, like, you sympathize with white people and not black people, and saying, oh, he was clean early on in his career, but not now. You don't say that about black people. Hell yeah, I do. Kiprop. I've said the same damn thing about Asbel Kiprop. I always felt like he was made to run.
Yeah, it wouldn't have surprised me that Kiprop ran his 326 clean, and then when he starts getting older, he decides, oh, I need a boost, and then he turns to EPO.
Speaking of that angle, Robert, El Kenyano, I guess in between the two posts I mentioned, had a third post saying, the worst part is people instantly trusted them because they're white. What I remember is Zane was always the angrier of the two, clashing with villagers and even accusing Eliud Kipchoge, who he doesn't know, of cheating, claiming Kipchoge was 44 back in 2016. Now, people are trying to find that this tweet, and so I don't know if that's the case, but I think one thing to take away from this is, yeah, you should have skepticism on anything anyone says. That's why you try to verify stuff. See who they associate, that sort of stuff. But we know cheating's going on. We haven't had it with a Westerner really like busted in Kenya. There's just so many things going on here. It's like an ink blot test for all your biases. You're gonna see in this what you want to see in it. My hope is somehow, well, with every drug bust, I hope this. I want him to name names. How prevalent is this?
But people get mad and say, like, oh, you shouldn't insinuate his brother might be on drugs or people associated with him. But I did that in 2016 because his ex-fiance was busted. And now look, this case, suspicion was warranted. Doesn't mean he was doping back then, but
And also, but even like everyone in New Zealand knew he was doping just because they got really good. How are you gonna know they're doping? Right? Some of that could be just jealousy. But there is sort of, I say that, then yet at the same time, I don't know, what do you want to call it? The runner rumorville? It's crazy accurate sometimes. Or maybe we only remember when it's accurate.
I think it's a little bit of both. A lot of times the stuff that starts out on the message board does turn out to be true, but also, Weldon, wasn't there a thread a few months ago, big doping bust incoming? Did anything ever come of that?
Here it is, John. Here it is. It was this one.
Here's the thing. You can start that thread, and then anytime people get busted all the time in track and field, and you can just say, see, this is it. We knew there was a big one coming. It's like, okay. I mean, yes, there's probably going to be a prominent athlete suspended at some point in the rest of 2023, but that doesn't mean we know who it's going to be.
Another thing I found interesting is when he retired, there was this huge thread. This is only from a month ago. So February 4th, he retires. And there's a thread on Let's Run. We'll link to all these threads. Zane Robertson retires. Was it worth it? And Zane posted on Instagram Sometimes I post here, sometimes I don't. The last 3 years haven't been great for me on and off the track roads. A lot of people, companies involved, and almost making me lose interest in the sport completely. A lot of things going on outside the sport also. People sometimes forget that we're humans before we're athletes. And I just at the time remember thinking like, "Wait, what's going on? What sounds like there's something else he doesn't wanna talk about." Now it's crazy he would post that if you're about to get busted for drugs. Did he think like people were gonna buy his excuse? But sort of back to the ink blot test in this thread, because a lot of people are saying, "Well, he didn't win any medals. He ran fast times, but like he spent 10 years of his life." And other people are like, "Wait, he lived the dream, man. Why wouldn't you want to do that?" Somebody posted, "Let's not kid ourselves. Most of his competitors were doping." So that person, was certain the competitors were doping, but Zane was clean. Well, karma's a bitch, as El Keniano says.
Yeah, I mean, if he was clean, I would have said, "Hey, he totally went for it. He tried to pursue his passion to the highest level, and it was great." But now this just taints everything, and I don't think you can say that anymore because everyone is going to look at his career differently now, as they should.
Do we know if he has any kids?
I don't know.
Because I always say money's not important until you need it. When you have kids, you need it.
All right, moving on to the other big event from the last week. That would be the New York City Half Marathon.